Okay, welcome everyone to the Analytic Mind podcast. Really exciting guest I'm speaking to today, Bruno Reis from Helmet Aerospace. That's where you're currently working, I believe, Bruno. And
Mhm.
I think you can give a much better background in a second, but really excited to talk about your business and your enterprise BI experience in the aerospace industry. I think that's going to be something super unique to all those listening. And also, I think we'll just highlight the variety that you can get in, that you can get involved with around, if you've got this analytical skill set. So I think there's heaps we can touch on. Really looking forward to this conversation. Why don't I just throw to you, Bruno, and you can just give a much better intro than I just gave.
Sure. Thank you, Sam. Hello, everyone. I'm Bruno Reis. I've been working for the last 15 years internationally in a multitude of environments and industries. I've worked in banking, I've worked in enterprise services, IT, I've worked in logistics and freight forwarding, and more recently now I'm working in the aerospace industry. During this period, I've also experienced the business or the businesses in different perspectives, not always on the data side. I worked in sales, accounting, finance, customer service, operations. So I have, let's put it this way, a multidisciplinary experience,
Mm,
which in my perspective brings some advantage in terms of having a broader understanding of our customers, which normally are our operations, sales, finance, etc. in the company.
right. And so I love how you've had such a diverse range of experiences, and I think I myself actually align with that as well because my background historically was in finance. It wasn't sort of IT related. Also, what do you think it is about how you go about solving problems that has led you to where you are now?
Um, I think it's because and this goes back a little bit further. My college education, I have a bachelor's degree in business management,
Mhm.
but all the way until 12th grade, end of high school, I was in the path for a more scientific career, natural sciences, in terms of chemical engineering, biology, and so on. And from there, I developed an analytical mindset. I pretty much try to approach everything, quote unquote, using the scientific method. I make
Mhm.
an observation. I start creating hypotheses based on the observation. I experiment. I look at the results to not new observations, create new hypotheses, and in accounting and in finance, sometimes people are so stuck into doing things as they always were. While I try to always ask, why is this like this? And how can we get to this other information? And that kind of approach kind of started pushing me from a more financial world
Mm.
to a more business analysis world, and furthermore to more data analytics.
Mm.
That and since childhood, I always kind of had a knack for computers, for
Yeah.
IT. So
Mhm.
that kind of helped. And in some cases, I became the unofficial local tech support in some jobs. So I was in
Right.
finance, but I was also giving tech support in terms of setting up hardware, upgrading operating systems, and so on, which was kind of a funny situation.
Yeah, nice, nice. I think it's a more common story than you think because you got to think that data itself has become more relevant every year for the past like 2 decades.
Oh, most
So
definitely.
yeah, and so in terms of like your skill set, how has that evolved? Obviously, you've got the sort of business acumen over time, but maybe from a technical uh, viewpoint, how has your BI skill set evolved over time?
My BI skill set evolved honestly based on need, and from a simple example, up until I really needed to start working with Excel, I didn't know anything about it. I knew how to make basic operations. Even a pivot table or a VLOOKUP would be kind of scary for me. The moment I needed to start digging deeper on that, I normally tend to be a self-learner and investigate and try to find more and more about the subject. And within less than a year, I went from being afraid of using VLOOKUPs to programming macros and creating user forms using the forms in VBA and so on. Same thing with business analytics. So I started with creating analysis in Excel, just creating reports, always trying to figure out better ways of providing the data, having better ability of providing better insights instead of just having a data table, creating more appealing user interfaces instead of having that gruesome Excel 2003 kind of look that we all know and are way too familiar with. Once I was exposed to BI tools, and the first one that I was exposed to was actually IBM Cognos, I started seeing the potential on having more centralized tools and technology that supports those tools. And I started pretty much researching about the subject, looking at different softwares, Power BI, Tableau, Click, reading data or reading books about the subject. And for instance, you can maybe see behind me, I have the Kimball collection of data warehousing in terms of dimensional modeling, which is a great starter and not only starter, it's great documentation in terms on how to approach data structuring at the scale level. Because on our line of business, and sometimes this is something that gets lost or is not fully understood, is that one thing is creating an ad hoc report. And you can make an ad hoc report in Power BI, it's all cool and pretty and everybody's happy with it. But once you start implementing that at scale in an enterprise environment, there's way more that you need to have behind that data set than just, oh yeah, I have data source A and B and mash them together in Power Query and here's the result. You have to start thinking big. You need to start thinking, okay, how am I going to have data governance? How am I going to regulate access to data and so on? So I kept evolving and reading more about that, and then doing online training, going to the certification exams on Microsoft. So continuing evolving my knowledge based on the need and also based on curiosity on what's the technology out there and now what can we bring into our house, into our company that will give us further advantage.
Yeah, that's great. I love hearing this story, and certainly I can mirror some a very similar a very similar narrative as well. How long have you been working in the aerospace industry?
Not too long. I was actually supposed to have started April last year, the beginning of April. But then COVID and everything went into a hiring freeze, and that postponed the process to August. And I started working at Howmet in August, and that's actually when I start dipping my feet into the aerospace industry and its nuances.
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, I'd love to just dive into a little bit more around that. Because the aerospace industry is, historically, you would have to say, has been such a small niche that, not many people touch, but it is growing exponentially right now. And every time you see something to do with aerospace, you always see people sitting in this command center with lots of computers and lots of numbers and lots of charts and information flowing through. So to me, business intelligence and operating with large volumes of data seems like it's becoming hugely relevant. Or I mean, it probably always was, but even more so now. So is that a trend that you identified, and why you've sort of moved into that space? And also, like, am I right there? Like, is that kind of like what you're experiencing being in the industry itself?
Well, the industry itself, they're very self-aware of their technical or technological, let's put it that way, not technical, how technologically outdated they are. Coming from a third-party logistics industry, aerospace industry is way ahead. In third-party logistics, it's not uncommon to work with systems from the early 90s. So, and even report in Excel sometimes like, oh my gosh, this is breakthrough technology. Aerospace, not so much. And it depends also on what part of aerospace, because you're talking about control rooms, lots of dashboards. You're focusing more onto the aerospace travel industry. So basically airplanes or spaceships or rockets flying places, lots of data to analyze in terms of those routes and passenger information and so on. Howmet, we're more into the industrial part of it. So we produce precision parts for airplanes and for engines. So it's a little bit different, but at the same time, there's also lots of information that needs to be taken care of. And that need has been identified, and that's part of why my position searched and showed up at Howmet, and that's what we're working on. So basically moving from the typical environment or more traditional environment where data is not centralized or doesn't have proper governance. So basically different stakeholders are pulling information from operational systems, be it ERP, WMS, and so on, or even CRMs, trying to mash it together, spending humongous amount of hours doing repetitive tasks. Each report is subject to personal judgment and personal calculations. So basically what we normally call a black box, because you see things coming in and things coming out. You don't know what's happening, what's processing inside. And that issue has been identified, and we need to work on creating a transparent solution where the data stream is much faster and provides insights with a flick of a switch, basically.
Yeah, nice. And so, what are some of the obstacles that you are experiencing, and also and also following on from that, what are you implementing to solve for them, especially around aggregating all of your data? So you mentioned all of the different systems that you had data in, and this is very common, right? This is everyone has legacy systems, everyone has different systems. And so what are some of the what are some specific obstacles that you're seeing there? But then also, like, how can you go about solving those? Is it just technology? Is it a combination of process and technology? Maybe just expand on that a little bit.
It's a mix of both. Technology, there's some limitations, but I don't believe that's the main obstacle. Technology, it's the easiest problem to solve. You just start bringing new technology that solves the problems. The issue is identifying the right problems, and the major difficulties that I've seen so far, and I'm not only talking about the aerospace industry at Howmet, I'm talking more in general across multiple positions that I had, is just throwing technology at things won't solve anything. You have to have processes behind. And the other part is also that in terms of infrastructure, as we were talking earlier. One thing is having that pretty ad hoc report that you just create in Power BI or Excel or whatever you're using to create it. And every time that it's repeated, you just have to do it all over again every day or every week or every month. And every time that somebody new wants to receive that report, you have to add it to the email chain. And sometimes it takes a couple goes until you don't forget to add that person to the distribution list, basically. But the reality is when you're implementing a system, in terms of technology, you want to have something that is more scalable. Because if we're talking about thousands of users and hundreds of reports or even thousands of reports and multiple data sources, you don't want to have a team of people just pushing buttons every day to do the same task. You want to create a system that gets that information and provides that information to the users in a systematic way. And I think there's a disparity in terms of expectations on that. Because stakeholders tend to be used to that. Oh yeah, you just asked for a report, somebody mashed it together and they just start sending it. And the reality is that there's way more work behind that. You need to create a data structure that will allow you to scale that up. Otherwise, you'll be caught doing the same work over and over again and reworking things to fit something else into the report or the dashboard that you're creating.
Nice. And so it sounds like you've been using the Microsoft stack. Like you mentioned Power BI a few times, and that's great because I'd be interested to get to dive into that a little bit more and see how you are using that as a piece of the puzzle. A piece of your sort of enterprise-wide BI program.
Okay, the way that we're trying to approach it, at first we pretty much opened the floodgates before having it pretty well thought through. So people started having access to Power BI, creating their own data sets, creating their own reports.
Right.
And that obviously creates a situation where data governance becomes complicated, and having the right access, people having the access to the right data becomes more complex. So we're kind of backtracking on that and trying to create a governance model that it's pretty much rigid at the core. So basically core information, core metrics and measures, KPIs are controlled and managed in a central model. So basically IT, and then having testers in terms of high-level stakeholders that would pretty much sign off on that data so that we can create certified data sets. And at the same time, and with more recent technology that is in preview in Power BI, making those certified data sets available that can then be enriched at the more ad hoc level by the users or the power users, report creators at each department that can bring their own data and combine them with the certified data sets. So that's pretty much the kind of direction that we're trying to point to. Obviously, in terms of data security, one main point is to decouple data sets and reports. In a basic sense, in terms of Power BI, a common scenario is where the data set is embedded in each report, and that creates a difficulty in terms of giving more than just reader access to a workspace, and at the same time enforce row-level security. So we're decoupling the data sets from the reports so that that centralized critical data is siloed behind a data set workspace that the users only have access to the data set to create reports. They don't have any edit ability for that workspace. So that way we're kind of enforcing the row-level security.
That's really interesting because a lot of that functionality has not actually been inside Power BI for all that long. Like you weren't able to really do that, not that long ago, and also the certified data sets is some very very fresh functionality as well. So so you're evolving your governance strategy to the great updates that that Power BI is releasing.
Yeah, pretty much. So basically, as I was saying, at first we started with an unstructured approach, just making the technology available. And now we're backtracking to make sure that we have a governance model in place that makes everything secure and very structured and controlled in terms of data dissemination.
Right.
And since we're pretty much at that initial stage where we can design everything, since we didn't have a mature implementation of Power BI in our hands right now, we can take advantage of the newest technologies available in Power BI, such as the ability of using a certified data set and then bringing data, let's say, from Excel for forecasts or so on, to a report, by a report creator without them actually having edit level to the data set itself.
Yeah, right. And do you feel though with that functionality that users aren't able to use, say, Power Query as much as they might want to? Or are you just not seeing that as a requirement in a lot of cases?
I don't see that as being too much of a situation. We have a few users that do some basic Power Query, but they don't really get too deep into it. And having the ability of having your data already set up the way you need it. And this is an important step because so that there's no need for that Power Query access. It means that the data set has to provide you what you need already. Normally, you need to dive into Power Query, and going back, for instance, for the reports that were being done in Excel, the data is pulled from a report or two from the operating system, from the ERP, but then there's always the need of the data manipulation at Excel kind of, as some people refer it, massage the data to make the numbers in the format that we need to look at them. If we already have that in the data set, I mean, why would you want to be recalculating on how to aggregate the daily sales, for instance, when you already have a DAX measurement that will provide you that, and month to date, and you have all of that already certified that is the correct measurements, and you just focus on, okay, I want it to show as a bar chart or a line chart or a pie chart. Some people still like those. And there you go. You have your report and you focus more on that part instead of spending hours or days thinking, how am I going to pull this data from the database and transform it to the format that I need?
Right.
And
Nice.
other things that I've also seen is in user-created data sets, sometimes, and especially due to the not good, more elementary level of Power Query or of M language, sometimes that Power Query is not the most efficient. And you have long loading times and refreshing times. You get situations where you run into frustration trying to design the report because you're playing with the Power Query part at the same time, and then you bring the 6 months data that you need and everything breaks because your machine doesn't have enough memory to process all of that, the format that you have. And if you have a data set that is already optimized, you're pretty much saving those headaches, and you can just focus on what really matters to you as a user, which is having the data in a report that you can analyze or that you can showcase to your teammates or to your team to start the discussion on how can we improve this.
Right. Yeah. Nice. Nice. What I thought would be also interesting to get into, and just based on where you sit within the organization, sort of from an enterprise BI perspective, is what are some solid strategies that you are seeing working well around consumer engagement? Because I think sometimes as analysts or people who work in business intelligence, we just think about our roles, but in reality, you've got to be making sure that your consumers are engaged as well, and you want to sort of like proliferate the data immersion all the way down to all areas of your business, right, and all different business functions. And so I was just wondering, and I think it'd be interesting to hear it based on Power BI too. How are you doing that, and how are you trying to do that successfully within your organization?
Well, it goes all the way back to the part of understanding the requirements of our customers, our users. So normally the approach is you need to talk with your users, understand what are their needs. And when they say, oh yeah, I just want this report, and show you an Excel file, you don't just replicate that, because that's what happens in many cases. We just say, oh yeah, it's fine. They're giving me a report. I just need to replicate this, easy peasy. So our life is easy. But the questions that are behind that is, so how do you use this report? And what's important in it for you? Is all of this data important? Because sometimes you have reports that have a heap load of data and metrics that are meaningless. I mean, people are just used to have it there, and over time, new people ask to add something else to the report, and 5-10 years down the road, you have a report that instead of showing you sales, it shows you a bunch of different metrics, even shows you what the CEO ate for lunch yesterday. And I mean, that's, of course, this is an anecdotal example. But you don't need all that irrelevant data. And just replicating a report because it was something that has always been there is not always the most efficient solution. Because at the same time, what's in it for the user? So it's just the same thing as the Excel report that you're receiving. So what's the gain on this? It's not making their life easier. It's just another thing that they have to log in and go look at the report instead of just receiving it on their email as they were used to. So the importance here, what's important here is talk to your customers, to your users, and then listen to what they're telling you. And then do follow-up questions, as in, so what's the important information here for you? How do you use this? Can you show me how the report brings value to you? And what do you really need to see? If you had only 2-3 things that you could choose from, what do you really need to see to help you with your work? Being something that is on the report or something that is just a wish list. Because sometimes you'd be surprised the things that the users say and like think that it's impossible, and then you look at that, oh, it's actually something that is easy to make available, and you're creating value to them, and that's what make them be more engaged. Which I know it's an issue in terms of implementing new technologies, is that normally there's a high engagement, everybody's happy at first, and oh, cool tools, new graphs, and so on. But over time, and we humans are creatures of habit, they just track back to the old habits, even though they're not more efficient. So you have to keep giving them added value and create a habit that this report or this technology will provide them an easier and better life.
Do you feel we're finally getting to a technology level, like the new technologies like Power BI are finally going to create the catalyst for change, for behaviors to move out, everyone to move out of Excel finally and move to a more comprehensive analytical tool? And also on top of that, do you feel like, are you seeing a change in the way the data culture operates within your organization because of tools like Power BI?
I'm seeing a change. I don't believe that the maturity level of the technology itself will be the sole catalyst. And not from Hamed, from previous experiences, I've seen that problem. Oh yeah, we have new technology, better technology, we'll just throw the technology at the users and that solves everything.
Mm-hmm.
No, it does not, because the users will just not use that new technology. We'll just keep using Excel because that's what they're used to. To have that change that you're referring to, more than just providing technology, we need to develop new cultures. Maybe with newer generations of users, it will be easier to, as more of the millennial and as the generations take over, it will be easier to adopt more interactive technologies, since they are
Mm-hmm.
also historically more used to it, since they grew with it. But it all goes down to culture, company culture and data culture. And until that elephant in the room is fully addressed, no matter how good and awesome the technology is, it will never really move us from the old habits that we have. We just have to break with those habits at the cultural level. And that's why it's important to fully understand the needs of your users and try to understand also what are their fears. Because I don't know on your end, but on my end, I observed that in multiple perspectives, since I've been on the other side too. I've seen people being afraid of letting go of control or being exposed, the fear that just because this report is being automated is going to show that they not always done it correctly, or that something that was perceived in terms of reality in the company, it's completely different because it's exposed. So there's a fear from the users, and we need to understand that and address that when implementing the technology. And I think that's the major catalyst. The technology itself, obviously, nowadays Power BI and Click and Tableau have been developing, and the benefits are more and more preeminent.
Yeah, it's so many interesting points you make there, and especially around culture. It is again, as sort of BI professionals, you sit in your world and you think, oh, I can answer everything with data, but the reality is that so many there's so many blockers, there's so many hurdles. More from us like a person to person point of view, like a bureaucracy, just like there's so many things that stop you from actually being successful and actually making a difference with your BI initiatives within organizations. I mean, I've got numerous stories like you just mentioned where a couple of interesting ones. I'd go out and I'd train. I've historically gone out and trained people number of years ago around Power BI. And you go and do these big sessions with 20 people, and half of the people are totally scared that they're just going to automate their job and have nothing to do. And then usually the younger folks are like, this is awesome, I'm going to be able to do 5 times as much. And so battling that is half the battle to switch around that culture. And I also had another one another example of a place I used to work where these new tools were coming in, and we realized that we were doing something wrong for years because the calculations were off, and then we calculated things correctly, and no one wanted to tell anyone. So there's lots of I've got some real world experience in both those examples that you gave. But in saying that, we want to be in a position where we're pushing our initiatives forward. So what are some things that you think you can do to get around those blockers and those disablers, the ones that aren't enabling the projects to move forward or the initiatives to work?
Well, there's a couple different approaches, and in some situations you might need to use more one and others more the other. One of the approaches that I try to take the most is showing that the obsolescence of a report that somebody was doing every day for 2 hours a day doesn't mean that their job is getting cut off. It means
Mhm.
that instead of doing something with zero added value, they're freeing up time to actually do something, as you were saying, like the younger people say, oh, I can do way more because of this.
Mm.
So showing them that we're just creating a platform that allows them to actually give more value to the company, become more valuable instead of just obsolete.
Mhm.
Of course, in reality, this is not 100% accurate. Sometimes you're literally just eliminating positions because that's the nature of the business. I mean, there's people that their positions are literally just to make reports. Um, but in general, that's not so much the case. And also showing this to the management, that just because this person is no longer needed to do this report doesn't mean that this person needs to be let go, that this person can now do things that give more value to the business, or can do other things that were not being able to do before because they were spending 2 or 3 hours every day putting together this report.
Mhm.
um, so this is the approach that I try to take the most, showing that people have value, and removing recurrent tasks and repetitive tasks like this are just bringing value to the company and making these people more valuable to be able to do more added value tasks. Um, the other approach that sometimes you have to have, that I don't like as much, uh, but sometimes it's the approach that needs to be done, is the enforcement approach, which is having the leadership of the company enforcing new rules down the chain. Because if you have somebody completely refusing to use a technology because of their fears, but in reality, it's something that needs to happen regardless, because it's mandated by the business, then leadership will have to push down and say, no, this is our new rules, this is how we do things now, and we have to adapt or you're out.
Mm.
And again, this is the kind of approach that I do not like. And I would
Mm.
prefer to go to this only in last resort. The best approach, in my opinion, is addressing people's fears, trying to understand them and make them at ease, and helping them understand that this is not the end, but the beginning.
Mm. I hearing you say those two things, I think it's a solid combination of both. I mean, I think you've got to have executive buy-in, um, and your executives can really create the inspiration for others to pursue things a lot more efficiently, and a lot quicker than they would otherwise. But yeah, obviously you want to make sure that the technology is suitable and is making the difference that you expect. But I think we can probably agree that if implemented well, these new tools, especially like Power BI, if you're a Microsoft shop, can make a pretty significant difference if you
Most
actually
definitely.
implement it well, and you have a good strategy around how you implement it. You have good governance around how you implement it, and then sometimes the cultural thing is sort of like the last hurdle that you need to you need to jump over, and having some executive sponsorship is a big part of getting over that, I think. So
Yes.
um, but yeah, no, look, I think those are really valid points. And one thing that I would like to just go back on is, the reality is you can do so much more than you could have historically. I mean, when I first saw Power BI before I made it my career with Enterprise DNA was that I was able to recreate. I knew I was able to recreate reports that have been done in the business for years prior that took so long. Like everyone was just working on reports. It was ridiculous. and you're able to automate basically 90 to 95% of it in Power BI, and then that was your starting point. You could just do so much more analysis. You would be diving into analysis and metrics that you never even thought you could, because you just save so much time from working in that era of Excel and PowerPoint, and the inefficiencies with that. So obviously you're preaching to someone who's very converted, but in terms of what's possible. But I keep telling people even now, like, the realization of what's possible is still very low. And
Yeah.
I presume you're seeing similar things from your point of view.
Yes, and I can give you actually an interesting example that I normally try to tell people when I've noticed that there's this fear of obsolescence, that helps them get a little bit more at ease with it. And it goes back to my times in finance, where at a certain point I was hired as a junior financial analyst, and the objective of sole purpose of my position was to create the monthly reports. These reports were being done manually, so basically you would have to extract information from the operational system, then convert it in Excel to multiple reports. It was a process that was taking 3-4 days a month just to create those reports, like 3-4 complete days doing that. And then more into the middle of the month, there would be a couple more reports when time would allow it, that would be created based on the same data. On the first month at that job, I started using my VBA skills to try to automate it. And within 2 months, we had a version that could go into production. And that 3-4 days per month to produce Excel reports became 20-30 minutes per month, because it would literally just download the CSV file, push a couple buttons on VBA, so basically on a user form that I created with the different buttons, and it would start generating all the reports, and they were ready to send. And if I was afraid that that would make me obsolete, I mean, why would I do that, right? I mean, it would create a situation where, oh, great job, we hired you. In 2 months, you made yourself obsolete. Now there's the door. But that's not what happened. What happened is that since those reports were out of the way, now I could start working in developing dashboards for sales, developing tools for accounts receivable, accounts payable, for operations. So I started creating added value to the company. Because what I was doing before, those reports were not added value. It was something that was already there, and I was just being an expense to produce those reports, a cost to produce those reports. And that cost became 20 to 30 minutes a month. And now I'm an investment where I can start developing other things and giving more value to the company. And I normally try to show that example as in being on the other side. And just because I automated a repetitive report, it doesn't mean that my job is gone. It means that now I can do things that are more valuable to the company and probably give me more job security.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is you become more valuable, don't you? You become almost the most valuable people in an organization, because you can go around and optimize, processes, do analysis that can maybe increase revenues, decrease costs. Like, there's just so much additional value. I mean, this is one thing that is a reoccurring theme on every podcast episode I do, is that there's just this blue ocean of opportunity to do more analysis, to build applications with like power apps, to automate things, to automate processes, optimize processes. I mean, we probably, if you look at most businesses, they're probably not even doing 5% of what is actually possible. So, the fact that I think the concern of making yourself obsolete is just null and void. Like, there's just absolutely no way. If you can automate the mundane aspects of your reporting, you're just going to find so many other areas that you can add value, exactly like the example that you just mentioned. How about we do
Exactly.
last question? How about we do last
Sure.
question? What are some unique it's been great to actually have a bit more of a sort of a Power BI discussion. I've really enjoyed that. Is there anything that you are excited about in the sort of Microsoft ecosystem that you can see being applied more significantly into what you're doing now?
There's a couple things in terms of the Microsoft stack that have been quite interesting recently. And with the evolution of the data flows and basically Power Query Online, that's very exciting, especially because you're moving especially for reusable dimensions like customer lists, master lists, and products, and so on. Instead of having that sitting at the dataset level, you have a data flow that provides that and makes that widely available for the different users. Because one of the things in that is also that sometimes there's difficulty for the users to identify where can I find a list of customers that will match with this sales report. And the data flows really make that availability very exciting, and it's a very exciting thing. Other things that I've seen in terms of technology, and going a little bit more agnostic in terms of the platform, is the slow shift. Probably should be faster, but a slow shift from the traditional having a data warehouse or a data lake that you throw all your data into, organized or not, depending if you're talking data warehouse or data lake, and then you just create the access to information, the reporting from there. And I've been reading a book from, his name is hard to pronounce, can only pronounce the first name, Peter. He is from Netherlands and has a book called Data Management at Scale from O'Reilly. And his approach is pretty much creating domains of data based on the different systems that we have. And pretty much you have a read-only database that the operational system itself, the ERP, is connecting to query data, and the domain of that data is retained within that group of systems, and the reporting is pretty much pulling information from the different databases, the read-only databases, instead of having a centralized data warehouse. And that sounds interesting in the sense also because no matter how much we have in terms of reporting technology, Power BI and so on, in the end, there's also the more mundane part where people just pull the ERP report for sales or for something that is happening at that precise moment. And this decoupling of the query database from the transactional database, so basically you have a pair of databases, makes it so that you need less resources on the operational system, because that system is only dedicated to update and write transactions. Any query transaction hits the different system, the different database that would be in a separate server. So you're not hogging resources from the transactional process for querying and vice versa. So those are two things that I've been looking into that sound very interesting. And in our access to readily accessible data, so that you don't have to wait for end of date ETL processes and so on. This will provide the ability of having a more granular access. And if you need to query data every 5 minutes, you're hitting that query database without compromising the performance of your ERP or WMS or operational system in general.
Yeah, really interesting. Really interesting. I enjoyed sort of getting an understanding of some of the more infrastructure challenges or different ways that you can set up your the core database infrastructure of your business intelligence projects, which I'm sure that is a really common challenge that everyone has to deal with, especially if they're trying to optimize what they're doing in the front end with sort of like Power BI. You've got to make sure that sitting underneath that is a really solid foundation, right?
Yeah,
and
most definitely.
making sure that's set up well. It's interesting though. I do, maybe for another discussion, but I find because everything from all of the cloud providers is all about creating a data lake. So you're actually reading an opposing view where it's not as it's sort of not like throwing everything into sort of one space. It's sort of dividing it up and optimizing it a little bit more before someone connects to it.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, well, I think we'll probably run out of time, but hey, super fascinating discussion. Really enjoyed the different viewpoints that you've got on a few things, and also the different experiences that you've had from where you're sitting in within your company and in the aerospace industry. Really also enjoyed a bit more of a discussion around Power BI, which funnily enough haven't done too much yet on previous episodes. So really enjoyed hearing your insight and some of the interesting trends that are happening in that space.
Yeah. Nice talking to you too, Sam. It was awesome to have this discussion, and it's always exciting to talk about Power BI and the new possibilities with it, because every month there's a new thing that every time that there's that monthly update and I see something is coming into preview, I'm like a little kid looking at the toy shop, like, new things to play with, and always start seeing what's coming after that and how can that be beneficial for the company. And for instance, in terms of the certified data set and that ability of using a certified data set with bringing your own data, it was something that I heard at the Business Application Summit in May, and I've been eagerly waiting for it to come into preview so that we can actually start playing with it.
Yeah, well, we're definitely two big Power BI fans here, but I mean, you've got to give a lot of credit to the Power BI team, in terms of what they have done over the years, and just built an incredible product from the ground up, and continue to, they continue to listen and continue to make lots of small updates that you don't even think about, but make such a huge difference. Like, sorry, I'm digressing a little bit before we round off here, but even just some of the navigation features that they've got inside of Power BI reports, it just makes, they're small things, but they just make a huge difference to what you can create. And it is super exciting to see the value generation that is going to go on within organizations with tools, especially Power BI and the Microsoft ecosystem. So,
yeah, most definitely.
Well, thank you so much, Bruno. Really enjoyed our chat. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for tuning into the Analytic Mind podcast. Great to have you listening in. Don't forget to subscribe, and also leave us some feedback on your favorite listening app. Really appreciate it. We always read it. We're trying to make our discussions as informed as we possibly can, and get more guests just like Bruno. So hopefully you're enjoying it as much as I am putting them together. Okay, everyone, take care, and look forward to speaking to you next time.